Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Eva Watt. I'm the Training and Capacity Lead for NL Support, and I'm pleased to welcome you today to webinar number 4. We will focus on how to write a grant proposal for a patient-oriented research grant, and this requires different grant writing styles and perspectives than you might be used to. We will talk a bit more in depth about how to meet the grant requirements for the current NL Support funding competition. And we will have time for questions at the halfway point of the webinar and at the end. I would like to inform you that this session is being recorded. A copy of the PowerPoint slides will become available on our website after the webinar. And in case you have any trouble hearing us or any technical issues, please contact our technical support desk. Our guest speaker of today is Dr. Debbie Gregory, and she was the chair of our review committee in 2016, and she is also a clinical assistant professor at the Faculty of Medicine. So, Debbie, I would like to welcome you today and thank you in advance for this presentation.
Thanks, Eva. Eva and I worked together on this presentation to ensure participants received as much information as possible to assist them in writing a patient-oriented research grant. The learning objectives of today's webinar, as you can see on this slide, are focused on learning about patient-oriented research funding opportunities, and more specifically about the requirements of one funding organization, and that is NL Support. In addition, we hope you gain an understanding of what reviewers consider during the grant review process and some of the reasons why grants are not successful. So I want to just review what exactly patient-oriented research involves. It's any research which engages patients as partners, focuses on patient-identified priorities, and improves patient outcomes. Involve, which comes under the National Institute for Health Research in the United Kingdom, defines patient-oriented research as research being carried out with or by members of the public rather than to, about, or for them. I just want to point out some examples of where you can go to look at patient-oriented research. In the United States, there's the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, PCORI. And as I mentioned, in the UK, there's Involve. And locally, we have NL Support, although at this point in time, a description of the research topics or studies funded during the last round of grant competition have not yet been posted on the website, but we're hoping they'll go up soon. The Canadian Institutes for Health Research, similar to other organizations, also emphasize the research priorities that are important to patients that will improve patient outcomes. This is their template that they have posted on their site. Basically, the patient-oriented research focuses on using a multidisciplinary approach to the research, which includes researchers, healthcare professionals, policymakers, working together with patients in order to improve the patient experience with the healthcare system and health outcomes. Currently, they do not have, to the best of my knowledge, when I went looking, they don't have any patient-oriented research projects that have been completed, but I'll get into this a little later regarding their funding competition. Sorry, just bear with me for a moment. Technical difficulties. Okay, so funding opportunities exist in this field of research. Over the course of the next 5 to 10 minutes, I will identify a number of these opportunities that you may want to investigate further. Certainly there are international and national opportunities available, as well as provincial and local prospects you might want to consider. Funding is also available through some competitions that are held by various advocacy groups in the country. So beginning with the international funding opportunities, the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Initiative in the United States funds comparative clinical effectiveness research. Basically, that involves studies that compare the effectiveness of 2 or more approaches to healthcare, and they look at risks and benefits. There's large pockets of funding available, multi-millions of dollars, through this organization. Foreign organizations and non-domestic agencies can certainly apply, but they do have to demonstrate that there is a benefit to the U.S. healthcare system and to patients in the system. So what you might want to consider for this type of a funding opportunity is partnering with researchers from the U.S. that may be exploring patient-oriented topics that may be of similar interest to you. And if you are interested in exploring this avenue further, NL Support can introduce you to local researchers that are co-applicants on projects that come under this funding competition. Nationally, we have the Canadian Institutes for Health Research. They have a patient-oriented research collaborative grants competition. The focus of the competition is on planning or team-building activities to assist teams to identify research questions and any issues that may be emerging or priority themes. The grants can be used in terms of designing a project which include meaningful roles for patients and others, and to identify and address the learning needs of team members. They also fund standalone project-oriented research projects. The total amount that's available from CIHR is $1 million, and it will fund approximately 40 grants, but it's dispersed in small amounts. You do need a matching partner, and CIHR will contribute up to $25,000 for up to 1 year. Now, the application deadline is very tight. It is December the 13th of this year. What other opportunities then are out there? Let's look at a couple of examples of opportunities that may be provided by the various advocacy groups. I'm just going to focus on 2. The first one is the Alzheimer Society of Canada Research Program, which funds research in 2 major areas, biomedical and quality of life. They have a research policy committee that provides advisory oversight to the research efforts of the program, and the committee makes recommendations to the board of directors as it relates to policy, strategy, priority setting, funding, program effectiveness. They have community representatives who sit on the research peer review panels. They're members of the general public who are not currently involved in research. These community representatives comment on the intent, purpose, and on the clarity of the language used in the lay summaries of the applications. And basically, their involvement in the peer review process serves as a mechanism for public accountability. They provide feedback on the peer review process. I just want to mention, there's a link here to a website. 2 of their current patient community representatives have mild cognitive impairment, and there's a write-up on what each contributes to the research policy committees that they sit on. So that's one example of an advocacy group. A second example will be the MS Society of Canada, Multiple Sclerosis Society of Canada. This society has 3 research review committees, biomedical research, clinical and population health research, and personnel awards, and they meet annually. They also have community representatives that have been involved in the research review process since 2012. These community representatives are people who have a personal connection to MS, and therefore they are able to comment on how the research will influence their day-to-day living and what the outcomes of the research means to them and the broader MS community. So each committee includes scientific reviewers and community representatives, and these people are selected by the MS Society and committee chairs. So this slide is an example, or provides examples, of other health research funding sources that you may want to look at yourself, but it is by no means a comprehensive list of funding sources. There are many others out there, I'm sure. By now you may be familiar with the NL Support Patient-Oriented Research Grants Program. I'm going to be addressing this funding source in greater detail in a few minutes, but just to give you an overview of it, there's $300,000 available. One-year grants awarded up to $75,000. The expression of interest competition closed at, sorry, not a competition, the expression of interest closed October 31st. And the full application closing date is March 31st, 2017. For more information, you can go to the website that's here on this slide. On a more local level, here at Memorial University, through the Office of Public Engagement, you might want to consider 3 funds that they award. There's the Quick Start Fund, which awards $1,000 to support small projects such as preliminary meetings, events, and service learning projects. Second, there's the President's Award for Public Engagement Partnerships. So they award up to 2 awards of $1,000 annually for collaborative partnerships between 1 or more students, staff, or faculty members, and an organization or group external to Memorial. The third fund that you may want to avail of is the Accelerator Fund. And this fund is up to $1,000, and it supports the initiation or extension of public engagement projects that link to Memorial's academic mission. More information is available at the website here on this slide. I just want to make a few comments on the Quick Start Fund. It's currently closed, but it will reopen in 2017. And the objectives of the Quick Start Fund are to support, as I said, faculty, staff, and students at Memorial in activities that foster public engagement and collaboration. It should further the goals and objectives of the public engagement framework available on their website, and it should further the mission of Memorial University and help meet its special obligation to the citizens of Newfoundland and Labrador. In terms of the Public Engagement Accelerator Fund offered through the Office of Public Engagement, you should be aware that this fund does not support research activities. However, your project, if it is part of a larger initiative that includes research, the engagement aspect of the projects are eligible. The funds cannot be used for expenses, for instance, related to research activities involving ethical review. But funds that are supported, which are specific research-related activities, are the development of funding proposals for publicly engaged research, feasibility studies, and pre- and post-research planning activities, and knowledge translation activities. So these are just a few patient-oriented funding opportunities that you may be interested in. As I said, there are probably many more out there. So at the moment, I'm just going to take a break, see if there's any questions before I actually focus on the NL Support Patient-Oriented Research Grant Competition in greater detail. You can use the chat room if you do have questions. I'll be back in a minute or so. This will allow anyone that may have questions to type them in the chat box. Okay, I just have to go back, bear with me for a slide. Okay, so now since there are no questions, I'm going to focus on the NL Support Patient-Oriented Research Grant Competition. And as by now you realize that NL Support assists research which is patient-oriented, focused on Newfoundland and Labrador, and on priority research areas agreed upon by NL Support and the community at large. The priority research areas were identified through town hall meetings and public consultations across the province. The Patient Advisory Council of NL Support also advises on the research priorities. This council consists of about 20 council members who meet quarterly. They review all grant applications to assess the level of patient involvement in the application and the potential for patient benefit in the proposed research. 2 or 3 of the council members sit on the grant review committee, and they have equal voting rights during the process. You may want to consider approaching NL support if you are struggling with how to involve patients as partners in your research, or at what point in the process you could include them. So by all means, contact NL support if you require access to any of these patient council members. The support themes for 2017 focus on access to services. These themes, these priority themes actually change, or could change each year. The focus this year are on priority areas including primary care, like physician retention or lack of available primary care physicians, supportive services including mental health services, paramedical supports, etc., and improving access to services by reducing wait times. What is not funded by NL support is systems evaluations or program evaluations, unless they address a very well-developed research question. So for instance, if an intervention has been put in place, for instance, in a community, and one wants to do a program evaluation on its effectiveness, that would not be considered unless there was a specific research question related to it. And for further detail, you can always, again, contact NL support for more information. So the expression of interest, as I mentioned, the deadline was October 31st. There's a confidential review panel selected by NL support that is currently reviewing all applications. And those applications that appear weak in any one particular area may be offered training or assistance free of charge, by the way, via NL support to strengthen their applications. In the meantime, while you're waiting, you can begin to focus on what will be required to prepare your full submission. Again, the deadline is March 31st. For those of you who have been involved in grant writing, you realize it takes time to write a grant. A lot of thought process goes into it. And you also have to obtain the necessary authorization forms. So I would recommend that you go to NL support website, get the awards guide, read and absolutely understand the eligibility and selection criteria, get your grant application and your authorization forms together, and organize a team, choose a leader, work with a timeline, work from an outline certainly, and I highly recommend you meet regularly to review and revise your application. Okay, the next two slides provide a few tips for writing patient-oriented grants specifically. So you should consider writing your proposal from a patient perspective. So what is the current, ask yourself, what is the current issue? In this particular case, the theme is on access. What do people feel that they need, and how is your proposal going to address those needs? You should also consider involving patients in the grant writing process up front. So you can approach them before you begin writing the application. Try to put their glasses on while you're writing it, again, coming from the patient's perspective instead of a researcher's perspective. Don't be afraid to ask them for feedback and support during the writing. And you may even want to consider inviting the patient or member of the public to be a co-applicant on your proposal. So when you get your thoughts together and you work on your proposal, you have to make sure that it fits. You have to ask yourself, does the research question that you've chosen ultimately matter to patients and public? Are there any signs that patients are involved as partners in the proposal? And does it really focus on real-world patient outcomes? So if you can't answer any of these questions satisfactorily to yourself, I would suggest, if you have any doubts or questions, you contact relevant people at NL Support. Don't forget that they are there to answer your questions and assist you in whatever manner they can. But keep in mind as you're writing that proposal that there is a difference between writing a traditional research grant and one that is meant to be patient-focused. It's all on the patient-oriented approach that they're looking for. These are just general tips for writing grants. Make your application easy to read and understand. I can't emphasize that enough. Be realistic and not overly ambitious about your proposal. Try not to include 7 or 8 objectives that you know you can't achieve in 1 year with $75,000. You have to keep that in mind. You also need to be explicit. You have to bear in mind that reviewers cannot read your mind, and they can't assume, or you can't assume, that they know what you intend to do in your project. I can assure you they don't want or have the time to search for the key points that you probably should have highlighted in your proposal. In terms of point 4, attention to correct English grammar and typos, this is very important because reviewers don't respond to a poorly written proposal, or don't respond well to a poorly written proposal, I should say. So as you write your grant, it might be helpful for you to know the composition of the review panel. So the panel itself is confidential, with the exception of the chair. Everybody knows that I sat on the last committee as chair. It's comprised of patient public representatives from the patient advisory panel of NL support, as I pointed out, 2 or 3 representatives with equal voting rights. Consists of academic researchers and policy and practice experts. So each group reviews the application through a different lens, and each has a different perspective that you have to bear in mind. So at the end of the day, however, consensus is required on which applications to fund. So NL support receives recommendations from the review panel regarding which grants to fund. However, the final approval is decided at a much higher level, and that's the steering committee level of NL support. So from the point of view of patients and public representatives, they review each application with the following perspective. They look for a proposal that includes a patient engagement plan, one that is meaningful and one that can be deemed effective. They look at the priority theme. Does it address a priority area of concern identified by patients? Is the topic important? And another question that they consider is, what happens if this research does not get funded? What then? They look at the impact the proposed research will have on patients. They look at it from, is it a regional impact? Is it going to affect them provincially? Is there some kind of a national impact that can be had or made through this research? They focus on the lay summary. They want it to be clear and understandable to a non-expert audience. They look at the title to see if it's understandable and attractive to the public. They also look at your dissemination plan and see if you've engaged the public in that plan. Is it effective, and does it allow the patients to be partners? In terms of the policy and practice reviewers, they consider the relevance of the research to health-related decision-making, systems improvement, and positive patient impacts. And they also consider the value to the healthcare system. So in terms of the value for money, these are the things, the areas that they look at. Can it be implemented? How effective is it going to be? Again, what is the impact the proposed research is going to have? Does it address a priority theme? Is it an important topic? Is it feasible? Are the goals achievable? And is the research question, they're interested in the research question and whether it is appropriate for the problem that's addressed by the proposal. The issue of value for money, I'm not going to get into. Dr. Mike Doyle covered this very well during his presentation on November the 10th, so I refer you back to that presentation for more information. Academic reviewers come at the review of an application from a different perspective. They focus specifically on scientific aspects of the grant application, which many may be familiar with from a traditional grant writing process. They look at the research approach and the originality of the proposal. They look at the composition of the team and if they have the expertise to execute the proposal, the research, sorry. And they also look at the environment of the research. Is it feasible to conduct the research in the area that is proposed? They also look at the impact and patient engagement plan and relevance to SPORE and NL support. They also look at the budget, obviously. A number of things that are considered by all reviewers include the potential contribution to the patient-oriented research field. They look at where you are involving patients and the public as partners in the proposal. For example, is it in the development of the research question, the study methods, governance of the research team, possibly in recruitment of participants, or in the dissemination plan that you would have to include in your grant. And all reviewers consider any potential ethical issues that may arise. So that was a brief overview of the grant competition review panel and what they consider as they review each application. I'd like to now focus on various sections of the application itself, including those listed on this slide. I'll begin with patient engagement plan that each applicant is expected to include. The NL Support website contains tools that you will find very useful as you write your grant. The Patient and Public Engagement Plan template is one such tool. I will not be covering the how of engaging patients as partners in research in this webinar. We just don't have time. That will be covered extensively in the next webinar by Dr. Holly Etchegary. But just to give you an idea of what that plan looks like, it's a template that helps guide you through 3 areas that you need to focus on or consider. You need to consider why you want to involve patients, who you need to involve, when and how patients can be involved, and think about what your goal is. What degree of engagement are you considering? Are you considering a low level of engagement, which is seeking patient-public advice, or are you seeking a higher level of patient engagement, for instance, engaging patients as equal partners in the research process? You also need to consider how you plan on engaging the patient and public, how you're going to go about it, which Holly will focus on next session. You need to consider where you can identify potential patients and what resources you will require. So these are areas for you to consider as you plan your patient engagement strategy. But what are the patient's perspectives of engaging patients as partners in research? So Patients Canada has a website that includes planning, guidelines, and tools for partnering with patients in health research. The tools were developed by patients for researchers and patients, and they focus on what's helpful from the perspectives of patients when considering partnering with citizens in research. They've identified 3 key areas that researchers need to consider when partnering with patients. So they look at the ethical perspective. They believe patients should be acknowledged for their expertise. They believe that confidentiality, for instance, is extremely important. It's a two-way street. What they share with you as a patient it should be kept confidential. And they also believe that thought should be given to what type of projects should include patients. Not all projects should include patients, and they believe that you should consider this up front. From a literacy lens, patients want to be briefed on terms and concepts related to the research and kept up to date. And finally, from a practical perspective, researchers need to consider what patients may want to partner, why, and where they can be located. Other areas requiring consideration on your part include providing resources and funds needed to support the patients and the time required to develop productive relationships, of course. So in terms of the team composition and roles, something you should consider in your application is, as patients have pointed out as well, and the patient engagement plan emphasizes, is how do you wish patients to become involved in your research? And at what point do you include decision makers and policy makers as well in that process? What you have to ensure and ask yourself is the environment going to be culturally and socially safe? Are patients and policymakers, decision makers going to be included, feel supported, receive respect, and participate in the co-design of the project? There's no point in providing lip service to patient-oriented research. You need to actually engage these groups in the process. This section of the application is one of the most important sections, I have to say. It's really important to get it right. This is an example provided to us of how important it is to have a clear title. One community representative shared the following in a recent patient engagement workshop. So there was a name or a title which was deemed to be insulting to the community and placed barriers between researchers and the communities that they were studying. So when the community members heard the title of the research for the first time, which the research focused on communities struggling to recover after the collapse of traditional industries, they asked the following questions. What are we sick? What are we recovering from? This was based on the title of the research. So this is an example of why it's important to involve members of the community or patients right at the start of the project. Consider asking your patients to come up with the best title. Similarly, with lay summaries, ask patients if they understand your lay summary. It's no point in cutting and pasting from your introduction or other parts of your application. Try to use tools for plain language. There are plenty out there. Even some advocacy groups have their own plain language guidelines, such as the MS Society, which you can access here through this PDF. You should also consider involving someone with some expertise in communication and marketing. Moving on to the detailed description of the research, this is traditional information that you would include in your plan. What your objectives of the research are, what are your research questions and hypotheses, how they link to patient-focused outcomes, which I'll get into in a moment. You need to address the current knowledge in the area, any gaps that might be there, how your study will build on and add to it, what's novel about it. And it's important to have an appropriate study design and method. So these are the things you traditionally consider. How are you going to recruit the patients? What's the sample size? Do you have enough power to find to support the outcome, and your data analysis. So getting back to these patient-focused outcomes, Dr. Sheila Garland will be covering this in an upcoming webinar in February. I just want to briefly highlight what she will be addressing in terms of patient-reported outcomes, which are captured through various tools that measure, for instance, quality of life, pain, depression, functional ability, and patient-reported experience measures, which actually focus on things like time spent waiting, access to and ability to navigate health services, involvement in decision-making, quality of communication, and would they recommend the service that they're receiving to family and friends. So there are very different approaches to measurement of patient outcomes. I'll give you an example that Eva used in one of her presentations related to the PROSPER study. This is an example of how patient involvement can change the type of outcome chosen by a group of researchers. In this study, the researchers chose a primary outcome, very concrete, major adverse cardiac events, or MACE, and this would include things like a heart attack, for instance. So based on the patient involvement in the planning of the study, the primary outcome changed from major adverse cardiac events to home time. So that is days alive and well outside an institution. This outcome was identified to be of greater priority by the stroke survivor focus groups than what the likelihood would be of experiencing an adverse event in the future. The knowledge translation planning template is available. It's an excellent resource, and you do have to include KT activities in a section of your application. This is available on the NL Support website. It was developed with permission from the Hospital for Sick Children. Again, I'm not going to go into the detail about this template, but have included it as a reference for you. Other KT resources you may find useful. For instance, I provided a link to the Alberta SPORE website if you are interested in exploring this further. But remember that NL Support has KT expert, Dr. Amanda Hall, who can provide advice and assistance to you with this aspect of your application if you require it. The budget, also an important part of the application, is similar to any other grant application that you would write, but you consider the cost of personnel, equipment, supplies, dissemination activities, travel. These are things that everybody considers. But from a patient-oriented grant perspective, you must also consider budgeting for patient engagement activities and consider payment of fees and expenses for the patients. Typically, you have to ensure that the amounts budgeted are reasonable and well justified, and they are within accordance of the MUN's financial guidelines and policies. Something for you to consider is compensation for engaging patients as partners in research. You should discuss this issue with patients. They should be recognized for their time and expertise that they provide to the group during the proposal writing and execution. It can take the form simply of a gift card, money, or simple thank you. Most patients really don't want to be paid for their contribution to such activities. But you do sometimes need to consider reimbursement for fees and expenses related to the research, like planning activities or meetings or reviewing various sections of your proposal, etc. Currently, the CIHR is working on compensation guidelines for engaging patients as partners in research that will be available soon to assist you as you write your full proposal for March. And as I mentioned before, the budget section of the Patient and Public Engagement Plan will be a useful tool to you to assist with this part of the application. The ethical considerations that you should consider are focused on what are the implications of using patients as partners in the research team. So you need to consider that as team members with access to patients' health information. You're required to complete a free online educational program about the Personal Health Information Act, available here at this website. All team members must sign an oath of confidentiality. And in contemplating what you need to get ethically approved, for the most part, patients who act in advisory capacity do not necessarily require ethical approval, but it's best to check with your local health research ethics authority for confirmation on that. What ethical approval is required for is if patients become involved as patient researchers. In other words, they're involved in the data collection and analysis, so they may be conducting interviews or analyzing data. Those are things that you will have to give greater thought to as you consider the ethical implications of these things. So to help you write a competitive and hopefully successful patient-oriented research grant, keep the following points in mind. Your proposal should be patient-oriented. So remember, prioritized by patients or the public. Patients and public acting as partners, focusing on real-world outcomes for patients. Involve the patients in the grant writing process if you can. Make it clear why the research is needed. Write in plain language, especially your title and summary. Keep in mind that people with different backgrounds are reviewing your application and are coming at it from a different perspective. And you definitely need to include a patient or public engagement plan. So there are a number of reasons which are very common for grant proposals being unsuccessful. This is a generic paper, I guess you would call it, written by Agarwal in 2006, which focuses on methodological issues associated with proposals. So it gets at study design, statistical issues, weak hypotheses, problems with the research question right off the bat, the fact that it's not novel or it doesn't create new data. So I would refer you to this article. It's a good read, but it's not, as I said, patient-oriented research specific. But it's good to keep in mind as you write the detailed part of your proposal. Some other reasons why proposals are unsuccessful is because the applicants do not read or maybe not understand the funder's interest and the application procedures. So you really need to pay attention to awards guides on the various websites that you're accessing. Another reason why the proposal may be unsuccessful is related to the fact that the research does not appear to be focused, or that it's too overly ambitious. You're trying to accomplish too much in the period of time that your funding is going to be awarded. Finally, the last 2 points here, you need a team that has the experience to execute the research. So sometimes it's not clear that this is possible, so you need to make this, clarify this in your proposal. And finally, the strengths and limitations of your data are not discussed, or the data collection process are not discussed. And you shouldn't let the reviewers do it for you. It's better to identify the strengths and limitations of your research plan up front. So I hope that was helpful to you. I'll pass it over now to Eva. Jumping the gun here. Are there any questions? You can use the chat room and we will try to address them. So I'll ask again, are there any questions? Do you need some time to type? I know my typing is terrible, but we'll give you a minute or so more in case you want to type something in the chat room. Okay, then I'm going to pass the session along now to Eva to clue up on another couple of slides that she wants to present.
Thank you, Debbie, first of all, for this presentation and for sharing your views from a reviewer perspective. That was really helpful. I would like to point out, if you have any questions or comments regarding this presentation or any other questions, please feel free to contact us at any time. Our next webinar will be in January 19th. And then we will talk more in depth about how to engage patients and how to find the patient's perspectives that you need for your specific project. So save the date and you will receive an invitation for us. You have to sign up on Eventbrite. We also launched our face-to-face sessions. Anybody with an interest can join these sessions. On a national level, the curriculum for patient-oriented research was developed by patients, education specialists, CIHR, and a variety of support units. And these sessions involve 3 different modules. So you can sign up for these different modules. Anybody with an interest is welcome. So patients, decision makers, researchers, health professionals, you may all sign up. However, there is limited availability. So bear in mind, first come, first served. And we will keep you informed about all the upcoming webinars in 2017. I would like to point out that we always welcome your comments and experiences with the webinar session. So please fill out the survey, which I will share with you by email, or just give us a call or write us an email. We would be happy to receive your feedback. And if there are no further questions, I would like to thank you for this session, and I would like to thank Debbie again for putting this all together. Just a last question, like anybody who would like to share a question in the chat box? We will be here for another while in this room, so people who have to leave, you could leave the session right now. People who would like to stay a little longer and would like to share a session or discuss something, please share it in the chat box and we will address your question or comment. Thank you all for participating in this webinar today, and I hope it was helpful, and I hope it improves your grant writing styles. We're looking forward to see your grant proposals.